Good morning. It's time for our last grammar segment. You have made it all the way to the end where we get to talk about clauses and sentence structure. In this unit, we're going to learn how we can vary our writing by using simple sentences and complex sentences and compound sentences. But before we can do those things, we need to first know what these things are. What's the difference between a clause and a sentence? So that's where we will begin. Make sure you have some guided notes and you're ready to fill them out with me as you go. Hit pause anytime you need to. Like this, our first rule, 9.1, all about independent clauses. Just like the word independent means you can live by yourself or you don't need anybody else, an independent clause is a clause that can stand on its own. It's a full sentence. It does not need to be joined to any other clauses because it contains all the parts and information necessary to be a complete sentence. All the information necessary to be a complete sentence. So, these things have three components. First of all, it has a subject. If you remember, our subject previously was something like Mr. Morton. Remember that one? It needs a verb, an action, or a predicate that it's doing. And it needs to express a complete thought, something that was happened, or something that's said, or something that makes sense. Now, this is a completely good sentence. Mr. Morton walked. I could certainly add more detail in it, like Mr. Morton walked down the street. Mr. Morton walked. Alright, sorry. There are some nice examples. Maddie reads. Our subject is Maddie. What she's doing is she is reading. Kirsten plays soccer. Our subject is Kirsten. Our verb is plays. Soccer is just some extra information about what she plays. So if we look at some subject-verb agreement going on here, our subject, Jean studied math at the university. Our subject, our who or what, is Jean. And the verb is that he studied. The students turned in their assignments. The who or what is the students, and what they did is they turned something in. Students turned in. Those are completely normal, complete sentences. So again, an independent clause is something that has enough information in it and all the parts needed to make a complete sentence and convey a complete thought. The opposite side of that is a dependent clause, which means, since it's the opposite thing, it does not express a complete thought all on its own. It may still have a subject and it may still have a verb, but there is something, either something additional in it or something that's missing, that it doesn't express a complete thought. They must be joined to another clause, and not only just another clause, they must be joined to an independent clause in order to avoid creating a fragment. We're going to see that a lot of these things just have a word or two at the beginning that make them dependent. Those things are what we're going to call a marker word. If there's a marker word in there, that's the signal that we have a dependent clause. These are things that show relationship, cause and effect, or timeline. So before shows a timeline. It tells us something happened first. Because of something, there's a cause and effect. Since something, that usually is a timeline thing. In order to, although, though, whenever, wherever, whether, while, even though, if. Lots of these things like even though and if These things show a relationship that even though one thing happens, another thing might also happen as well. A clause can be dependent because of the presence of a conjunction. These are the fanboys that we're looking at. Do you notice them? And, or, nor, but, yet. Okay? So some examples. Before you go to bed. Because I fed the dog. Even if I have my yearbook. If I didn't have the word before right here, you go to bed is a perfectly good sentence. But because I have the before sitting right there, it makes it a dependent clause. So if we can identify the marker word or the conjunction in some of these, then we can start to take a look at whether it's dependent or independent. So let's look at the marker word. Nor do I. Well, I see it right up here. Nor do I. Do I is an awkward sentence, but it is a sentence nonetheless. It's just a reflexive sentence of I do. Here is nor do I, which means I don't do that either. Whenever I watch Ohio State play, this would be our signal word that's making it dependent. If I just said, I watch Ohio State play, it would be a sentence. I could put a period right here, and it would be a sentence. But as soon as I put this guy in front, this whenever, now all of a sudden I have a dependent clause. If I walked up to you in the hallway and said, whenever I watch Ohio State play, you would probably look at me and say, well, what happens whenever you watch Ohio State play? So that is, again, that signal that this is not an independent sentence, an independent clause. It's dependent. It needs another part. While in class, here's that while, that signal word. Alrighty, on the back side of your handout, you have some practice sentences where I am simply asking you whether it is dependent or independent. Check these dependent or independent clauses, write your best answer down here. And in class, what we will do to do a quick check is I will call people at random for these 8 sentences. You will drag and drop either the word dependent or the word independent to the line to tell me whether it is in fact dependent or independent, and then we'll check your answers. Please be ready with all 8 sentences. Continue on to the ones later if you have time. Thanks, friends.